Nigeria. It's a country that always seems to be on the cusp of greatness.
Hmm.
So much potential, but right now, it feels like they're really up against it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Inflation is skyrocketing. People are struggling to afford basic necessities. We're talking food, fuel, the essentials, and then there's the unemployment crisis. It's like a gut punch, especially for the younger generation.
It's tough, no doubt about it. It's more than just numbers on a spreadsheet, right? We're talking about real people, real families struggling to make ends meet. That's devastating.
Absolutely. And the crazy thing is this inflation, it's been brewing for a while now, hasn't it? It's not like it just happened overnight.
Not at all. If you look back to 2019, inflation was hovering around 11%. Still a concern, but manageable. But over the past 5 years, it's been this steady, relentless climb, and now it's above 22%. That's more than double in such a short period.
It makes you wonder, are other countries in the region facing similar struggles, and what are they doing to combat it? I mean, are there any bright spots we can look to for potential solutions?
Well, there's Ghana. They've been battling their own economic demons and recently took the plunge with debt restructuring. Basically, they sat down with their creditors and renegotiated the terms of their loans.
Risky move, isn't it?
It can be, but sometimes you need that breathing room to get your house in order. And then you have Kenya. They've gone the austerity route.
Spending cuts, belt tightening, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, not exactly popular, but it can be effective in stabilizing the economy in the long run. The big question is, will Nigeria be willing to make those tough calls? Because let's be real, doing nothing, that's not an option.
No, it's not. And it's not just about tackling inflation in isolation, right?
Mm.
This is about the ripple effects, the way these crises are impacting every facet of Nigerian society. Especially when we talk about young people. What's the point of getting an education, of dreaming big, if there are no jobs waiting for you on the other side?
Exactly, and that's the harsh reality for almost half of young Nigerians today. The youth unemployment rate is somewhere around 45%. That's more than double the global average.
Double. Just let that sink in for a moment.
It's a generation facing a future where their skills and talents are being wasted. It breeds frustration, disillusionment. It's heartbreaking, really. And it's not just a personal struggle either. It holds the entire economy hostage. Less productivity, less growth, more poverty. It's this vicious cycle that's incredibly difficult to break free from.
So, are there any countries out there that have figured out a way to crack the code on youth unemployment? What are they doing differently that Nigeria could potentially learn from?
Well, South Africa, for instance, they've implemented these massive public works programs, providing temporary jobs, often in infrastructure or community development. It gives young people valuable experience, a paycheck, and a sense of purpose.
Okay, so it's about creating opportunities, even if they're not permanent solutions right off the bat.
Exactly. And then you've got Egypt going all in on infrastructure projects. Roads, bridges, airports. These mega projects create a ripple effect throughout the economy, generating jobs not just in construction, but in engineering, project management, you name it.
So, strategic investment and a long-term vision. It begs the question, why hasn't a resource-rich country like Nigeria been able to replicate these strategies? Especially when you consider their heavy reliance on one particular resource.
Oil.
Exactly. It's almost unbelievable, isn't it? They're one of the world's top oil producers, yet they can't seem to keep their own pumps flowing.
It's
What a-
complicated.
Yeah, complicated is one way to put it. It
Yeah.
seems like every time I read about Nigeria and oil, it's the same story. They're this oil-rich nation, but they're constantly dealing with fuel shortages. How does that even happen?
It's a classic case of what's called the resource curse. Sounds counterintuitive, right? You'd think an abundance of a valuable resource like oil would be a guaranteed ticket to prosperity.
Right, it seems like it should make things easier.
You'd think so, but it can actually end up distorting the economy and lead to a whole bunch of unforeseen problems.
So what's the root cause of this fuel crisis in Nigeria? How did they get here?
Well, here's the irony. Nigeria is pumping out millions of barrels of crude oil every day, but they lack the capacity to refine a lot of it domestically.
Wait, so they're exporting all that crude oil and then having to turn around and import refined petroleum products like gasoline and diesel.
Exactly, and that dependence on imports makes them incredibly vulnerable to global price fluctuations and all the chaos of global supply chains these days. And then you layer on top of that the internal challenges.
I imagine that list is pretty long.
Oh, it is. Things like corruption, inadequate infrastructure, fuel subsidies that aren't managed effectively, it all adds up to this perfect storm.
And who ends up bearing the brunt of it?
Everyday Nigerians, of course.
Stuck in those endless lines at the pump, paying exorbitant prices for fuel, businesses struggling to keep the lights on.
Exactly. They're held hostage by this cycle, and it's a stark contrast to other oil-producing countries that have their act together. Look at Angola, for example.
What are they doing differently?
Well, they've invested heavily in their refining capacity over the years, so they're not nearly as reliant on imports. Plus, they've implemented policies to help stabilize fuel prices, ensuring that their people have access to affordable energy.
It's like night and day. So why is Nigeria struggling with this when there are clear models for success out there?
It's complicated. There's not a single magic bullet to fix it. But one thing's for sure. They need to diversify their economy.
Move away from that dependence on oil.
Exactly. It's about investing in other sectors, creating more opportunities, nurturing industries that have the potential for long-term growth.
Which brings us to another area where Nigeria is facing an uphill battle: education.
Couldn't agree more. Education is the bedrock of everything. It's the engine for innovation, the key to unlocking a nation's true potential.
But it seems like Nigeria's education system is stuck in a rut, constantly disrupted. It seems like every other week we're hearing about strikes by university lecturers.
Right. The Academic Staff Union of Universities, or ASUU, they've been striking on and off for decades.
Decades. Wow. What are they fighting for?
It boils down to better funding for universities, improved salaries and working conditions for lecturers, and academic freedom. Basic stuff, but fundamental to a functioning education system.
And it's not just about the money, it's about the principles, the foundation.
Exactly. And the saddest part, these strikes have such a devastating impact on students. Just imagine you're a young person, eager to learn, you've got these dreams for your future, and then boom, your education's constantly being interrupted.
It's like hitting a brick wall every time you build up momentum. Years of potential progress lost.
It's a real shame.
And what about healthcare? It seems like that's another area where Nigeria is facing serious challenges.
Absolutely. There's a reason they say a nation's health is its wealth.
Right. It's all connected.
When you've got a healthcare system that's chronically underfunded, starved of essential resources, struggling to retain skilled medical professionals because they're leaving for better opportunities.
It's almost like a brain drain in the medical field.
It is. It creates this vicious cycle. And the consequences: high rates of preventable diseases, limited access to quality healthcare, especially in rural areas. People are dying from conditions that are entirely treatable elsewhere in the world.
It's a tragedy. And
Yeah.
it feels like we're seeing the same systemic issues play out in both education and healthcare.
You're right, it's a recurring theme. Lack of investment, lack of resources, lack of political will.
But there are countries in Africa,
Yep.
right on Nigeria's doorstep, who are proving that it doesn't have to be this way.
Absolutely. Look at Rwanda. They basically had to rebuild their entire healthcare system from scratch after the genocide.
Talk about an uphill battle.
They still face challenges, but they've made incredible progress, particularly with their community-based health initiatives and their focus on primary care.
So it's about making healthcare a right, not a privilege.
Exactly. And then there's Botswana. They've made massive strides in combating HIV/AIDS, which used to have a devastating impact on their population.
They've managed to turn the tide. It's inspiring.
It really is. It proves that with focused effort, strategic investments, and the political will to prioritize the well-being of citizens, change is possible.
It's a powerful reminder. So we've got all these interconnected crises: an economy hanging by a thread, an education system in shambles, a healthcare system on the brink. It paints a pretty bleak picture, doesn't it?
It does, and to be quite frank, the source material doesn't sugarcoat it. They bring up the very real possibility of social unrest, and they even draw a parallel to the #EndSARS protests back in 2020.
Yeah, those protests, that was a real wake-up call, wasn't it? Like the whole country was on edge.
It was this outpouring of frustration and anger that had been building up for years, and it really shone a light on the disconnect between the government and the people they're supposed to represent.
And it wasn't just about police brutality either, right?
What?
It was about the economy, the lack of jobs, the feeling that the government wasn't doing enough to address the everyday struggles of its citizens.
Exactly. All those underlying issues came bubbling to the surface. And it's not hard to see how, with everything going on right now, a similar situation could arise again.
It's like history repeating itself. And we've seen it happen in other parts of the world, too.
Absolutely. Look at what happened in Lebanon. Years of corruption and mismanagement led to this economic meltdown, and people just couldn't take it anymore. They took to the streets demanding change.
Or Venezuela, a country that was once a beacon of prosperity in South America, brought to its knees by hyperinflation, shortages of basic necessities, people fleeing their homes in droves.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? These cautionary tales underscore the importance of tackling problems head-on, addressing the root causes before they spiral out of control.
It's like ignoring a crack in the foundation of a building. Eventually, that crack's going to widen, and the whole structure could come crumbling down.
Exactly. And it's not just about averting disaster, it's about realizing that a nation's true strength lies in the well-being of its people.
Yeah, it's about creating a society where everyone has a chance to not just survive, but to thrive.
Right. Couldn't have said it better myself.
So that brings us to a really important question, and one that I don't think has an easy answer. What role, if any, should the international community play in all of this?
Right. It's a tough one.
On one hand, you've got the principle of national sovereignty. Every country has the right to determine its own destiny, right? But on the other hand, when you see the level of suffering, the scale of the challenges, it makes you wonder if there's more that can be done.
It's a delicate balance. But at the very least, I think we have a responsibility to stay informed, to stay engaged, to amplify the voices of those who are often overlooked.
To not let Nigeria fade into the background noise.
Exactly. Because ultimately, the struggle for a better Nigeria is one that will be won or lost by Nigerians themselves.
It's their fight, their future.
And we should be doing everything we can to support their efforts, to be allies in their pursuit of a brighter future.
Well said. It's been a really insightful conversation, and I want to thank you for bringing your expertise to the table today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you a better understanding of the complex issues facing Nigeria today.